All right. So in this last segment, we're going to talk about some things that make it more difficult for us to talk about sexual issues, even with our romantic partners. So why do we keep quiet? Well, sometimes we don't talk about sexual issues with a potential romantic partner because we feel like we're not exactly sure that we know what we're talking about, and that we might say something that would make us look foolish or something like that. So again, I'm going to congratulate you for taking a human sexuality course, because hopefully you'll have information in your head and or knowledge that the information is in fact out there, and that you can easily acquire it on the internet, and so that you can kind of buff up on the topic and be feeling more confident about talking about sexual issues. Another reason why we really don't talk about sexual issues is because we're embarrassed, right? Like these are topics that everybody throughout our childhood probably sort of would lower their voices while they're talking about things pertaining to sexuality, talking about periods, or talking about what sex acts they enjoy, or these kinds of things. A lot of times people lower their voice unless they're talking to peers and they're sort of like trying to one up each other or something like that. When you're in a relationship situation, it's sort of a vulnerable place to be talking about sexual things or bodily function things that relate to sex organs and stuff. And so it's embarrassing. A lot of times it's embarrassing because we don't know which words are appropriate to use in this context. Like, I'm sitting here in this class using all of the, scientific words. And so I have absolutely no embarrassment using these words. But if you told me I had to teach this whole class using the kinds of euphemisms that I would use to like talk to my children when they were little about their body parts, or that maybe I used with my friends when I was in my teenage years or something like that. If you told me I had to teach this whole class using that vocabulary, that would be really embarrassing. I wouldn't want to do that because it makes the content mean something else when you're using different vocabulary, right? So me using scientific vocabulary, oh, we're talking about scientific stuff. If I start using, euphemistic casual language, well, now it might be, I don't know, dirty that I'm talking about this, right? It's a different thing. And so not having a good shared vocabulary is one of the factors that makes us embarrassed. And so it's one of the reasons why couples oftentimes will develop their own special vocabulary for things. There's a really cute ad on TV right now where this older grandparent couple says, well, since the grandkids moved back in, it's hard to get any alone time. And they kind of give us that meaningful look of what we mean by alone time. And they said, so we had to develop a whole new vocabulary. So now we call it having fruit bowls. And then their little granddaughter goes, fruit bowl? I want a fruit bowl. And then they're like, these days we're eating a lot of fruit bowls, but we're not having a lot of fruit bowls. And, that kind of shared vocabulary is what we're talking about. It makes it a lot easier for couples once they have decided on what the terms are going to be. Fear of judgment. If what you have to disclose is something like, being, having an STI, or having had sexual experiences of different kinds in the past, or things like that. The fear is that the person who you're disclosing to, who you've only gotten to this point of disclosure because you've gotten to know them well enough, you care about them enough, you think this is going somewhere, and then you're afraid that they'll judge you, or that they'll reject you, and that, you're worried about what this is going to do to the relationship. And so that can be really, self-restricting. There are taboos about certain subjects. I mentioned in a previous lecture that really, in polite company, you're not supposed to talk about sex and politics and money and things, religion. But once you're in a relationship that could include sexual behaviors, it's like, okay, I think we need to talk about this. We probably need to talk about where this is going, and do we need to have, protection, or, we need to talk about certain things. Or maybe we need to talk about the fact that, well, we can only go do certain kinds of activities today because I'm having my period, or, these kinds of things need to be talked about, but there are taboos about it. And so it's like, I don't know. I don't know if I can bring this up, right? So a lot of times people will self-censor because they know that it's potentially not something you're really supposed to bring up. Ultimately, overriding all of this is that people are worried that they're going to get rejected, and that, disclosing too much will be sort of that straw that broke the camel's back. That's it. I'm out. I can't do it, anymore. And that's what I think people really, at the fundamental, level, that's what they're really concerned about. So, there are things you can do about some of these things, make sure you have plenty of information, develop a shared vocabulary, determine what is taboo and off limits to talk about, things like that. And then you just sort of have to get over the other three and hope that you can kind of plunge through and it all works. But you can see why there aren't oftentimes, deliberate consent given during sexual activities, because it's sort of like, how do we even talk about it? So I'm like left with, we just all have to sort of get over it and work our way through it when we have a potentially, partner that we might have sex with. Now, this is a little Wikihow that I'm going to give you the choice of watching or not. What I'd like you to watch for is not necessarily the greatest, advice for how to spot an abusive relationship. It has a little bit of good advice. It's what I thought was interesting is, first off, there's a Wikihow about how to spot an abusive relationship. And then second off, it's very sexist because it says how to know if your boyfriend is abusive, right? I mean, there can be abuse from either side. So I'm going to put this in the playlist. You can watch it if you want, but I'm not going to have it go directly after what I'm talking about. I'm not going to take a break right now. It'll just be at the end of this whole thing. Instead, I wanted to kind of maybe prep you for it by talking a little bit about the cycle of abuse. Unfortunately, in romantic relationships, even in friend relationships, sometimes there can be an abusive component. And so I thought I would talk to you about what research has shown us about what can happen in an abusive relationship. So here we are, the relationship has begun, everybody's happy, we're all, we're in love, and then tension starts to build. So during this phase, the one partner might become more critical than they had been, more judgmental, possibly more controlling. Where are you going? Who are you going to be with? Let me look at your phone. Things like that, not trusting their partner. Maybe during the tension building phase, the potential abuser might do things like try and keep their romantic partner away from their old friends, away from their family members, right? So during this tension building phase, there's sort of this attempt to control, this attempt to limit contact with other people. That tension building phase may be followed by an explosion, and it could be, a violent explosion. It could be a verbal explosion that's full of just put downs and, personal attacks. Sometimes people will say, well, but I mean, they never hit me or anything like that. It's just, they talk to me really badly. And talking to you really badly is not part of a healthy relationship. We just got done talking about John Gottman and what it's, how not to criticize. A lot of times in abusive relationships, it's not just criticism. It's like personal attacks of, just fundamental things that are being just attacked verbally. And so, oh, you're ugly, or nobody else would ever want you, or things like that should never occur in a relationship that is supposed to be based on love. So it's abuse or it's violence. And the thing to know is that these explosions get more extreme with each cycle. So we go through this tension building phase, there's an explosion of some sort, and then it's followed by this honeymoon phase where the person who exploded apologizes, makes excuses for why they acted like that. Oh, I was drunk, or I was really tired, or, I'm under a lot of pressure at work, or something like that. And they try to make amends. They buy gifts, they make dinner, they do things to try and show how in the relationship they really are. This isn't really me, that, that's not how I normally act. And then, the relationship continues because, the person who was the victim kind of buys the apologies and the excuses and the amends. And they're like, okay, they didn't mean it. It was a one-time thing. And they actually start second guessing themselves. They're like, well, maybe I somehow, elicited that. And if I didn't make them mad, this wouldn't happen, or something like that. And so they kind of return to their relationship, and then slowly the tension starts building again. And then now the next explosion is going to be more intense. And so then the honeymoon phase is going to be full of more profound apologies. The excuses might start to include manipulations such as, well, I'm only doing this because I love you and I care about you. And I'm only doing this for your own good, or they might say something like, you've got to learn when to stop pushing me. This is why I blew up. Really trying to place the blame on the victim, and again, trying to make amends and things like that. But the thing is, it's a circle. It's a cycle that continues and continues. It's not like the person is just going to stop reacting that way when they're under tension. It's not going to stop. And that's the thing. Like when you're not in it, when you're an outside observer, other people can look at it and say, why aren't you leaving? But when you are in it, it feels like there's hope, like this person could change. It feels like they've really started to confuse the victim about like why this is happening. And so there's a lot of psychological manipulation. There's a lot of financial manipulation. A lot of times abusers will make sure that the victim doesn't really have access to shared assets, things like that. A lot of times there are kids involved and the victim's like, where can I go? I've already been separated from my family as a result of this relationship. And so I don't even know how I would get there. I don't have a vehicle. I mean, a lot of times, some of these situations are quite abusive and quite constricting. And so you don't get to have a phone and you have no contact with other people. Others are, like we're at the beginning and the signs are being present, but the person who is the victim is sort of hopeful. They're hoping that this will go away. And they also have a certain amount of sometimes embarrassment because maybe their friends and family have been trying to get them to leave and they don't want to have to ultimately admit that their friends and family were right. And so they'll try and like fix the situation rather than escaping the situation. So it's a really complex situation that involves all sorts of, second guessing and mind control and other kinds of things that can go along with the cycle of abuse. Now you'll notice I keep calling it the person and stuff because while it is true that the vast majority of physically abusive relationships are the male abusing either another male or a female, when you are looking at same-sex partnerships, abusive relationships are just as common in same-sex relationships as in mixed-sex relationships. But when we look at physical abuse, it's more likely that it's a male perpetrator on their partner. If it's two females in the couple, it could be one or the other that might be physically abusive. Female abusers are more likely to use psychological abuse to control their victim, especially when the victim is male. And so a lot of times men will lose their sense of self, their sense of what we call agency, their ability to sort of chart their own path and things like that because their female abuser has beaten them down psychologically so much that they're sort of basically trapped in the relationship and they don't know where else to go or anything else to do and like that. So it's a lot more complex than it might seem like from the outside. A person on the outside may tell their friend, you've got to get away. You've got to just, break ties with this person. And the person in the relationship is like, yeah, easier said than done. Or I know what you mean right now, but when I go home and I hear the apologies and the excuses and the person makes amends, it really softens my heart. And so it's really hard to do it. So now a lot of times in my face-to-face classes, students will say, well, what should a friend who sees somebody who's going through this do? Like, is there anything that a friend can do? For one thing, all I can say is be a friend. Like, even as the abusive partner tries to sever ties between you and the victim, just be there, call, drop by, just be a friend, make, dates to meet up for coffee, things like that. Just be a friend. Don't necessarily even talk about what's going on at home, but just be a friend, be present. And the reason why I say don't necessarily talk about what's going on is that sometimes the victim will feel like they have to break up the friendship with you as the supportive friend because you're just pressuring them to do something that they're not ready to do yet. And it might actually make an extra barrier for why they can't really break up because everybody's telling them to leave their partner. And so being a good, steady friend who's there to be supportive and not encouraging them to stay with their partner, but not pressuring them to leave. Can be really super helpful. And if there looks like even the smallest window of an opportunity to suggest to them, you know what, if you want to spend the night at our house tonight, you're more than welcome. Or If you want to go talk to a social worker, I know somebody, and so you could do a little background research and be ready with that in your back pocket in case the person shows any kind of interest. Then, if you have resources or you have an idea, they might just take that hand. And so, but you kind of have to wait until they're ready. And it's really painful to watch when they're not ready. And when they finally are, it's like the sunlight comes out and you're like, okay, finally, we're going to be able to maybe start moving away from this abusive relationship. There can be backslides and the person might go back because their optimism about the relationship doesn't necessarily end. But that's my best advice. Just be a friend. That's all I can really say. So that's my advice. And hopefully this has been an edifying section for you. I will see you guys in the next section.